one partner is just saying like, whatever, you can just decide, like, that's fine. Like, I'll be dead. Who cares? Like, whatever. And I'm like, actually, that's not very nice. Like, this is just you putting the burden of the decision on this person that you're telling me that you love. And they're like, well, I'm trying to, I'm trying not to like force them into do something because, that just seems really mean. I'm like, it's actually meaner not to make a decision and to just say, like, you decide. I'm just like, listen, there's a lot of decisions to be made and each one's fairly complicated. Some of them involve emotional and sometimes potentially moral decisions about like extending life or administering certain kinds of life-sustaining treatments. And some of them are just freaking expensive. Like, what do you want in terms of your funeral? The decisions are both emotional and financial. And so you just decide, it's fine, whatever, I'll be dead, who cares? Like I just try to, tell people that it's not nice, even if you think you're trying to be nice. And I started to call it outsourcing your discomfort.
Welcome to the Childfree Wealth Podcast, hosted by Bree and Dr. J, certified financial planner. Here we discuss life and finances as it relates to being child-free. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your advisor before implementing any ideas heard on this podcast. Hey Childfree Wealth listeners, I'm very excited for today's guest. I met her at a conference back in October and knew immediately I wanted to have her on the podcast. Our topic today is going to be one that's often considered taboo: death. She encourages others to make the key decisions regarding death and dying as an act of kindness to those who have been left behind. She's the founder of Dying Kindness and the host of the podcast Dying Kindness. So without further ado, let's extend a warm welcome to Cianna Stewart. Cianna, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, I'm very excited. The first time I saw you and you had that shirt on, I was like, do not pass go. And It was like, go to the grave.
Go directly to grave. Do not bring your belongings.
Yes. That was like, oh, I need to have her come on the podcast. That was fantastic.
Yes, and for the listeners who can't see the shirt, it of course has a Monopoly style logo with a Grim Reaper replacing the cop.
Yes. It was so funny because it bright orange, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes.
Bright orange.
Yeah, you walked in and I was like, what in the world? Like, what does this woman do? And then you had mentioned you were a death expert. So with that, can you tell our listeners more about you and how you got started in this work?
Absolutely. I'll have to start with my favorite way to introduce myself, that I'm Cianna Stewart and I'm going to die someday. Spoiler alert, you will too. So my entire program is called Dying Kindness, and the goal is to give people the information and inspiration that they need in order to make key decisions now to be kinder to the people they'll leave behind. And so that includes overall general death education. I do work with teaching people how to fill out advance directives, how to think about a will versus a trust, even how do you think about, the concept of legacy. I've expanded it to looking at how to age well, because one of the things about taking care of ourselves and actually being able to call on people in the future or just to not need as much help is actually to take care of ourselves when we're younger so that we age well as we can. And it also tends to engender less resentment among people who are caregivers if somebody actually tried to take care of themselves well versus if somebody just kind of let themselves go or destroyed their body and then just needs a lot of help. There's all different kinds of aspects. Of course, the concept of aging and dying overlaps with everything. I don't know if you can hear the sirens in the background. Yeah. I am in downtown San Francisco in an office building. So yes, there's going to be sirens.
That is all right. San Francisco is, I think, one of my favorite cities. So I understand lots of sirens when I was there. So if I was coming to you and saying, I really need help. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm scared to die. I don't know anything about it. How does that process look when you're working with people? What do you kind of start with?
Well, often I point them just to the podcast first. I've designed the podcast, which is also called Dying Kindness. I designed the podcast so that people can go through and select individual episodes that feel relevant to them. Starting with episode number 1 is actually great. I designed it as a way to introduce people to the overall idea of doing all of this work and why is it important for me and you and everybody, and also why is it important not to avoid it. And I tell my own personal story about having my dad die in 2019 after having a very long illness. And he had assured us that he had taken care of his paperwork and stuff, but he really hadn't. And his office was a mess and everything was a mess. And I ended up just being really angry at him, and which was terrible. Like, I just wanted to grieve my father dying, and instead I ended up being super angry. And I was like, I don't want anybody to do that to me. I thought like, oh, I'm all angry, but then I realized that I didn't have a leg to stand on, that I also hadn't done my paperwork or anything. And so that kind of inspired me to reach out to folks and say like, hey, I'm going to do this now. Who else wants to do it with me? And that kind of kicked off the formal side of dying kindness, even though I had actually been doing a lot of work around death and dying for many, many years and in different ways, just because of personal stuff. And I did work in the AIDS industry in the 1990s and a lot of other things that are related to it. But this was like the most personal, and it was where I really started to come face to face with the fact that I didn't do my own work, and everybody needs to, no matter what age, really. So that was kind of the one really good place to start, because I think that a lot of people can relate to my personal story. I also have Deathbinder template, which is a basic outline of different things that you want to complete, separated into like what's most essential, and then you can kind of work your way through like what's also important, and it's also just very helpful. Or I have online courses that I'm building up, including a Death the Basics kind of course to help people get a little bit more like curious about how we came to the process of death in the United States, and with some, what I consider fun facts. Some people might not think it's fun to talk about death, but I do.
I took the course. I thought it was very fun. I did enjoy it.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Yes. And so, to try to like give like all of these different ways to have access points, depending on wherever people are at, if they want to do things more of a class setting, or if they just want to listen or whatever, different approaches.
Yeah, I really like that because it allows people to kind of learn how they best learn, and they're not having like pushed into one spot. I did the death template that you have, the Deathbinder template, and I have all my paperwork done, everything, but I had never thought about who needs to be notified, because I am in different organizations and groups and I didn't include any of that. So now I've updated everything and included that information. But I was like,
that's
oh,
fantastic.
Man. I'm like, yeah. That is so simple, but so easily overthought. Like, who needs to know that I died? Mm-hmm, so otherwise I have these memberships and people expect me to be at things, and just Bree's not there.
People are used to you being there, and then you're not there, and it's like, well, what happened? And some people get the information and others don't, and it's one of those things where it's just really nice to have it be much more organized and a whole lot less work for the people who are cleaning up after you.
And even though we're child-free and I work for the child-free community, we don't have kids, people listening to this podcast, we still have people around us who we love and care about, whether that be a partner, friends, other family members. It doesn't matter if you have kids, you're still going to have people who are wanting to make sure things are in place, so you're not making it harder on them either.
Absolutely, because no matter who you are, you've left some kind of footprint on this earth, and that has to be cleaned up after you die. Whether it's a single apartment that just has some stuff, or it's like a whole house and a business and a book that has royalties, who are the coach of the local swim team, or like whatever. There's some way that you've made an imprint on this world, and that needs to be cleaned up by somebody. And it doesn't necessarily have to be kids. And actually often for even people who have kids, it's often not the right person, at least to be the first people to go through. Often the kids are like overwhelmed, or they're dealing with other things, or they're just grieving, and so you kind of want to think through that as well. It's like, how to help your friends. I've now been associated or involved with several friends who have died who did not have kids, and just seeing how communities that they were connected to came together to support the people who were affected, everybody else in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it can often be scary and people don't want to take care of it, but one thing that I noticed in your Death the Basics class was how death has gotten further removed from society and in the home. And that was something that was very surprising to me because I grew up with a lot of death, and I've watched CPR, I've seen people have strokes, like a lot of these different things have happened right in front of me. And they are very traumatizing events. I will never downplay that. Like, they should not happen in front of other people, but also it's just hard. But for me, I'm like, oh, I never thought about people are scared of getting this stuff done because it's so far removed. And that was something you brought up in your course too.
Yeah, and that's an increasing problem. I mean, it's one of the ways that, we're talking about here in the United States. It's particularly medicalized. Death has become very medicalized in the same way that birth has become very medicalized, and just bodies in general. Like, we are so uncomfortable with the concept of aging and of getting sick and of disability and all of these different things. And we have become so specialized and reliant on specialties where now it's like doctors know and what kind of medical interventions are possible that, really are limited to the hospital. Like, for both good and bad reasons, it's just become farther and farther removed from the old ways, which was, that people would get sick at home, that doctors would come to the house, that people of all ages were exposed to funerals and to people getting sick, and just in general, it's like not mysterious. And, on a bonus, it's the reason that one of the reasons that we started doing more medical stuff is because we were having advances in medical technology. And so now we don't have like kids dying as often and all of that. And so like there's a way that it used to be more familiar for very tragic reasons, but we've now spun like so far the other direction that people don't even know if it's like appropriate to bring a child to a funeral, and as if like you can protect children from death, and that even that is a good concept. Like, that is so far away. So that I now know people who are in their 30s and 40s who have never known anybody who's died, or who have never been to a funeral, or who have never been to like they have no contact. Their parents dying or getting sick is like the first contact that they have. We're also all living longer, so it's very possible for people to get to their 60s and still have parents. It's kind of wild, and it's great. But if you have no exposure, like that shock of that, or the like what it even means to have to close up after somebody's died, like it's all very mysterious. To try to do it while you're grieving, it's really harsh, which is one of the reasons why I try to get everybody to like make all these decisions in advance so that your people can just grieve. Like, the hope is that you lived a life where people love you and they're going to miss you. Do as much as you can to allow them to just miss you.
Yeah, that is so true. And I remember the first funeral I went to, and I think I was in second or third grade. And I remember going to many, many funerals as a kid and even up until now. But my wife had never been to a funeral. The first one she's been to 2 funerals in her life, and they've been for both of my grandpas. And that was 3 years ago, was her very first one. So she was in her 20s and graduated from college by the time she'd ever been to a funeral. And it was hard for me because not only had she never been to a funeral, but also one of my grandpas I lost. One was expected, the other one was just very sudden, very, very public, very tragic. And so for her to experience like, oh my goodness, the nerves of going to her first funeral and never seeing somebody's body before, and then me trying to be like, I'm trying to keep all these people away from me who everybody knows what happened, and it was just a freak accident. That was hard because I wanted to grieve, and thankfully he had everything taken care of. In high school, he had, it's just a funny story, but he had come to my house one day, and he was like, oh, at my funeral, I need you to do these and these and this, like all these things. And I was like, I'm so mad at you for telling me this right now. But I wrote all of it down. And then I was like, nobody's going to believe me if you don't sign this. So I had him sign it, and he signed everything. And I still had the paper, and I went up to my desk drawer in my childhood room the day after his funeral because I was like, oh wait, I had that paper and I found it. And so now it's just really funny because we're like, oh my God, like I remember that conversation, and we did a lot of those things. But it was just like a good way to grieve and remember him and not have to worry about everything else that was happening.
Right, right. And it doesn't, you get away also from that self-doubt of like, is this what they would have wanted? And, potential for like, if you have family members that argue about like, oh, we should do this and versus that, like, it's just nicer to have it all written down and have that conversation in advance. How amazing that your grandfather did that when you were in high school, but also like, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like everything that he had for me. He just gave me the silly stuff. And I remember it so vividly because I was doing my math homework and I was like, no, Grandpa, this is not the conversation I want to have with you. And he goes, well, you're going to need it one day. I am getting up there in age. It's like, okay.
Okay, fine. But
yeah,
sign it.
Exactly. So I'm like, I need to have your signature. Otherwise, nobody's going to believe this.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it was, but getting that paperwork done can be, nerve-wracking. And we talk about, let's get it in place. And that is often one of the hardest conversations we have with our clients. Do you find when you're walking people through, does it take a while, or are they usually like, by the time they reach out to you and want you to kind of work them through this, are they pretty receptive, or is it?
It can take a while, and I've worked, so you're asking specifically around like both people taking classes, because mostly I do workshops, but also I've done some individual coaching for supporting people to like have these conversations. What's been interesting is in the workshops, people are opting in. They're pretty ready to have some kind of conversation. I feel like they just need to learn something, know something. I know a lot of people who have like taken the courses and all this, and then they keep telling me like, I still haven't done my papers, but I totally am going to. And like it just takes a long time. Like I just know that like there's a certain something, resistance that we just take a while to actually do it. There are also times when I have been sitting down with couples and like one of them is super ready to do it and the other one is not. And so like this is me coming in to help facilitate conversations that need to happen. And especially when one partner is just saying like, whatever, you can just decide, like, that's fine. Like, I'll be dead. Who cares? Like, whatever. And I'm like, actually, that's not very nice. Like, this is just you putting the burden of the decision on this person that you're telling me that you love. And they're like, well, I'm trying not to like force them into do something because, that just seems really mean. I'm like, it's actually meaner not to make a decision and to just say, like, you decide. I'm just like, listen, there's a lot of decisions to be made and each one's fairly complicated. Some of them involve emotional and sometimes potentially moral decisions about like extending life or administering certain kinds of life-sustaining treatments. And some of them are just freaking expensive. Like, what do you want in terms of your funeral? The decisions are both emotional and financial. And so you just decide, it's fine, whatever, I'll be dead, who cares? Like I just try to, tell people that it's not nice, even if you think you're trying to be nice. And I started to call it outsourcing your discomfort, because I feel like the reason that people are not making that decision is because they're really uncomfortable. And so even if they're telling themselves the story that it's like, it's okay, my partner can decide, I don't really care. And like, I'm trying to do that to be nice. It's like, actually, no, it's the opposite of nice. Don't outsource your discomfort. Just go ahead and make a decision. Even if you change your mind later. That's the other thing too, is it's like, it's not like making these decisions is going to accelerate your death. Like, like some people have some kind of like weird superstitious thing around that, but you also are not, it's not like bound. You're not disallowed from changing your mind later. Like you can say what you want and then revise it, and that's fine, but just get it down even like the first time and then just revisit it later.
Yeah. And that's kind of how mine is right now. Like, I know I'm going to have to revise it at some point, but you're right. Like, just get it down. And I like the term outsourcing your discomfort, because that is so true. Like, it is not okay to just say, no, you make the decision. Make a decision for what you want. And this situation, and, I've heard couples, oh, well, we're just going to do this. And the other one's like, well, that's not what I want done. Like,
right.
What? No.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about like how difficult it is even to just decide on like, where do you want to live? Do we like this house? You know, which car do you want to buy? Like even sometimes like, what do you want to eat for dinner? Like these are difficult decisions. And, you know, the like, oh, you know, it doesn't matter. You decide, like, we all know that that doesn't always actually go well. Well, the stakes are way much higher than dinner when it comes to somebody's, like, you know, life sustaining treatments in the hospital and final resting place. Like, this is their, like, the burden is so intense. And so, like, if you two have ever had a hard time, like, deciding on a vacation or dinner, like, just think about that, like, time bazillion. And then don't do that.
Like, yeah, you can't change your mind with these things.
No, you can't change your mind, and they have to live with whatever the decision finally was. Also, if there's a potential for doing something weird, like, and that is probably the thing that you would want or that they would want or whatever, you can also spare your people like being challenged about it if you're very clear about it. I would like to be like launched into space, or I would like to, you know, have all of my money go to save dogs, or like whatever it is. Then the person who has to execute your plan will have a lot easier time if anybody says like, why did you do that? That just doesn't seem like them. That's not the person that I knew. It's like, well, maybe they've changed, you know, but that is the thing that they decided. It's written down, and here's, so like they can be really confident. And that'll also just help them moving forward into the future too.
Yeah. So what are some of those weird things that you like often see, or tell me more. I want to know.
Oh, absolutely. So final disposition. Woohoo! One of my favorite topics. So there's so many different ways. Like when you die, you leave a body behind, and that body has to be dealt with in multiple ways. So the traditional way is, of course, burial. The most common thing that we see all the time is burial in a prescribed cemetery, which usually involves a casket and some kind of a vault. A vault is a box for the box. It goes into the hole first, and then the casket goes into it, and that's just to protect, you know, everything. But that is extremely environmentally destructive, and it also consumes a lot of space. So a lot of, you know, in terms of land usage, it's pretty intense. So some of the quote weird things are simply things that are a little bit more environmentally sensitive. So you can still do a burial, but you do a burial that is not in a traditional cemetery, but it's in like a green cemetery. You do it in a biodegradable casket. There is no vault. There may or may not even be a marker. Some of the places actually end up looking like nature walks and conservancies so that you can be buried among the trees. There are also tons of options if you decide to go with cremation. So cremation, traditional cremation is using fire, but there's also a version of cremation that uses lye and water. So it's called aquamation or water cremation. And that is less environmentally intensive because the final output is like clean water. But in both situations, whether you do water or fire cremation, you can actually end up with ashes that you can do all kinds of things with. So now we're in the world of like, whew, okay, you name it, like it's been done. You can have those ashes sent off into space. You can have them buried along with tree pods, and so that there's a tree that grows up out of it. You can have it turned into glass art. You can have it embedded into a tattoo. You can put it into a little motorcycle bell for people who are like long-term riders, and so you actually want to like still go on rides forever. Hunters can put them into rifles or shotguns and actually like go on another hunt. You can have it like, you know, like there's so many different things. It's totally wild, you know. And then if you don't want to do the cremation route, a very new thing is called natural organic reduction, also known as human composting. Or terramation.
Yeah.
Now you've got cremation, which is fire cremation, aquamation, which is water cremation, and terramation, which is this natural organic reduction or human composting. This is very new, and it's not legal in all the states, but it's getting to be more widely adopted, and so like it's coming to a state near you. And it is legal in a few places, and basically the output of that is it's a process where the human body is transformed into very, very fertile soil. And so that soil can then be used in a garden. It can be added to a conservancy or some kind of like land conservation trust area. All of these different kinds of other things that you can do with just whatever you would do with like high quality, rich soil, which is different than just a burial, because that it just goes into the ground and it's not necessarily like turned and cared for in the same way for composting. This one uses a certain combination of like, pressure and all of this kind of stuff to turn it into really good soil, in the same way that like just putting something in the ground is different than putting it into a compost box and actually like consciously like turning it and using heat and all of that kind of stuff. There's also just water burial. You can have your body dropped into the ocean in particular places if you are somebody who wants that. It's been available to the military forever, but now it's available also for civilians. And then like an in-betweener that I've always really loved for myself. I'm a scuba diver and I love being in the ocean. And so you can also have your cremation ashes mixed into artificial reef. You can, help to shore up some damaged coral reefs and help with like ocean conservation. That's my option for if I die when there is no natural organic reduction in my state. But if I do die in a place where there is natural organic reduction, I would like to be turned into compost. I think that would be cool. Those are my two options. And then things could change. There's also body donation that you can do for anybody who's a true crime fan. One of the things you can do is you can donate your body to a body farm, and then they use it to learn how bodies decompose in different kinds of ways. And so then that is this kind of stuff that informs crime investigations. So, hey, you can carry on your love afterwards. So many different options out there.
I knew about like cremation caskets. I've seen all that before, and I had heard about the terramation on TikTok and seen kind of the process. They like walk through everything. I didn't know that you could just do like the water burial where I thought that was only something the military did with certain people that they didn't want to be found. I didn't know that was a civilian option as well.
Yeah, it's not only like the mafia, like
that was my immediate
thought, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and historically, it's been the military. Like instead of storing dead bodies on like a ship that's at sea, then they would put them into the water so that they weren't like storing that part of the ship. But in certain areas, it's not everywhere, but there are licensed ships that are allowed to take bodies out so that you can be disposed of in the sea. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do that, and one of the like also not great ways that I ask people not to do is to actually just dump a whole casket in the ocean, because that's just massive littering, and it also will not decompose and it just gets destroyed. It'll destroy whatever it lands on. There are shrouds that you can use to take a body out into the ocean, and then that will all actually like decompose over time. There's different options there, but you do have to do it through a licensed place. You can't just like, randomly drop a body overboard, because then it's a crime. So
yeah.
There are a few things where people are like, can I bury my body if I have land? Can I just, put a body in a garden? I'm like, well, yes and no. Again, murder. We don't want to, like, you just can't randomly bury bodies in your yard. But if you are creating a cemetery plot on your land, you can get a license from your local jurisdiction, whether that's your city or your county. But then you also have to declare it if you ever sell that house. You have to make sure that you tell other people, like, there's a body in the yard, because that's not something that they want to just like find out when they decide to put in a swimming pool or whatever. Lots of different things.
Yeah, that's like so, I don't know. This water thing really still has me. I love the ocean, but like, I know that there are bodies in the ocean, but now I'm kind of like, oh, are there more bodies going to be in the ocean? Maybe I don't like the ocean anymore.
Don't worry, it's not very many, and they decompose pretty quickly out there. Yeah, they get consumed, or they just fall apart. So yeah, water is a pretty destructive for bodies.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I did a forensic anthropology class in college, and my professor worked with like bodies and body farms, and so we dug up things, and we had a human skeleton that we would lay out and figure out the bones. So I've heard about it that way, but man, I don't know. This water thing really has me a little bit shook. Like the ocean. So I am a swimmer, like lifeguard, teach swimming lessons, love the water. I am terrified of lakes and rivers, but I'm okay with the ocean. But I don't know that I'm okay with the ocean as much anymore now. Like, this is making me a little nervous.
Don't worry, it's not very many. It's just a handful each year. It's like the ocean is very, very large, and this is also not everywhere. So there's only a few places that you can actually do this, and it's through licenses. So I would say don't worry about it too much. Like the ocean is still the ocean that you know and love. It'll be fine.
That's good because I'm going on vacation there in like 2 days. I cannot have this ruined.
No. Don't worry about it. Yeah, forget that I said anything. That's my job, to make people like nervous about weird things that they were never nervous about before. Yeah. But also to make people calmer about things that they were nervous about, unnecessarily. So,
yeah. Because having this conversation and talking about death more, and even you saying like, hey, I'm Cianna and I'm going to die someday, it just normalizes it and it makes it easier. It's a hard topic still, but it should be more of a conversation and people should be talking about it so we can make these decisions and not then outsource our discomfort to those around us.
Exactly. It's definitely a goal to normalize all of this because it's not like talking about it. If we avoid talking about it, then death isn't going to come. It is going to come. And the more that we normalize talking about it, the easier it will be for people to like metabolize any deaths of people that they care about, and also to just kind of get through what is happening to them or to their loved ones or to their communities or whatever. I do have a goal of getting to the point where we can talk about it much more comfortably. And it's also important because one of the reasons that we value life is because death exists. Like if life was for eternal, forever, then we wouldn't it's not as precious. If we didn't age, we wouldn't value youth. If we didn't, have the risk of disability, we wouldn't value health. Like there's a thing about the transience of it that makes it that much more valuable, which I think is one of the great things about talking about death and getting like really clear on it is like, it just feels like life just feels that much more precious as a result.
Yeah, that is so true. And it is like we miss people who are gone, but also, yeah, if death didn't exist, we wouldn't be valuing his life as much. We wouldn't be taking and going on different experiences that we've had. Is there ways that you've seen or like different types of people, one is more okay with talking about death and other people are not as okay? Does it the impact of how many like deaths they've seen in their life or how they grew up? Are those any sort of consideration?
Definitely. The more that you've been exposed to this conversation, the easier it is. And so you can get exposed through having exposed to actual deaths, but you can also just get that exposure from talking about it and thinking about it and having it become a normal part of your conversation. And that just makes everything easier. I do invite people to like try to bring it up periodically in different ways. Talk with your friends about like, hey, did you know that there's this like aquamation that that even exists? Do you know like what do you think about natural organic reduction? And then specific to this particular podcast, when we talk about estate planning and legacy, so much time is spent and focused on children, but this is a child-free wealth podcast. And so thinking about what is your legacy beyond children? What communities do you touch? Do you want to leave a scholarship behind? Do you want to make a park? Do you want to have like a special bench? Are you writing a book? Are you doing all these things that are other versions of legacy? And is that even important to you? You just want to like have a really great group of friends that you see on the regular, and that is a full life and they'll miss you when you're gone. And that is also legacy. Like we don't have to do giant grand things and call it a legacy. Legacy is anything that you're leaving behind, any lives that you've touched, any thoughts that you've created that imparted to other people. Like all of that is also part of your legacy.
And it's a good point. Like it doesn't have to be super grand, because that is one question I get from people often is, well, they'll say, I don't really have big dreams, so I just want to live and be around the people I care about and enjoy life. I'm like, that's okay. Society pushes us to say, oh, we need to have this and this and this. Like, no, that's okay if you just want to enjoy life and be with people who you care about. And that is okay. A perfect legacy. I don't like, when you and I first talked on the phone, I was like, the idea of always like having to use the word legacy. Why can't we just be dead? Because to me, yes, we're dead, but also it is a legacy. I get the word. I just don't like the word. I think it implies that it has to be some big grand gesture. And I don't want that. Like, I want it to be more of like, how did this person love and show up in life?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, and that's why I want to get back to the original word, the use of the word legacy, because basically everybody has a legacy. Like, it's not like, do you want one? You do have one. What do you want that to be? How do you want to shape it? Do you want to focus your energy on individual connections with the people who are around you so that you have a legacy of love? That is a great thing. You can have a legacy of politics. You can be somebody who, your life was working on campaigning for something that mattered to you. You can have a legacy of finance, which is what we hear about the most often, whether it's building a business or building a building or whatever. But it doesn't even have to be that big. Like, I also, like, one of my goals is to create a scholarship and leave that behind. And considering the kinds of scholarships that I had that made a huge difference for me, like, I had one scholarship that was $1,000, and that was a gigantic help for me at the time. Can I create an ongoing thing that gives people $1,000 every year? Well, yeah, actually. And that is perfectly sufficient. Or do I just want to like buy a brick that helps my favorite theater? And, that's fine. Like, that's great. Whatever plant flowers in a sidewalk that is otherwise really barren. All of that counts as legacy. And I think it's really, I'm with you in terms of hating the pressure to do giant grand gestures. But the truth is that we all have a legacy, and it's just whether or not you want to shape it, and like, what do you want to shape it to be?
yeah, that's a really good point. And one of the ones I love, like, I like looking for the bricks and reading the different names, but park benches too. I love park benches, and I always will stop and read them. And my wife's like, come on, like, I'm trying to get this time. I'm like, well, I got to read the bench. You just keep going.
Totally. Totally. Like, I love those park benches, I also have some friends who are like super into geocaching. And so this idea of like leaving behind a geocache that, highlights a particular view on a hike that you really like, that's great. It's just like, make people like look out at this view. Like, that's awesome. I love those things too. And it kind of like also gives you a little bit of a tie into who that person was when they were alive. Even if you never knew them, it's just kind of nice to like, oh, somebody sat here and then like brought their dog here every morning and they played in this park. That's great. Perfect.
It is. And there's one that I always usually will like sit down on, kind of get ready before I go for my runs. And it says, in memory of person's name who walked this valley from these years to these years. And I'm like, my goodness, like, that was 20 years ago they passed away. But what did it look like then? And what is it, grown to now? It would be so cool to see, because it is a gorgeous area, and I understand why they'd want to walk there all the time. And so having that bench just in one of the best lookout spots for it, I think is so cool.
It's so great.
Yeah.
Now I want to know where your bench would be, where you would want it.
Where I want my bench?
Mm-hmm. Or you're just going to have to think about it, yeah.
I have, the only problem is like it's on my family's land, so it's not a public spot people would go to. Mm-hmm. But there is one spot that I have, and it is my absolute most favorite view in the world. And I in my funeral plans, I was like, you need to sprinkle me there. And it needs to be when the water's high enough, because sometimes the water gets too low and it dries up. I'm like, if it's dry that year, keep me on the shelf. Just keep me hanging out till the water comes back. But the sunsets there are just fantastic, and it's like right on the farm, and yeah, that'd be where my bench is at.
That's great. That's perfect. People can just sit up and look at that sunset.
Yeah.
Love it.
It is.
Yeah.
This conversation has been fantastic today. Is there anything else that you really encourage people to do if they're talking about death and want to learn more about it and just learn more about you as well?
Well, we talked about so many different things. I have a bunch of episodes on the podcast that cover all the different things you can do with cremation, how to have conversations with the people who are resistant, like lots of different things. So I'd say definitely go there and, get the death binder template. I've got a Facebook group to try to help people help each other so that they can talk through hey, I just found this resource, or I have this question, or whatever. So all of those things are great. Your listeners may notice that there's a big gap in my podcast right now. It's just a lot of things happen in my personal life. Things happen. Podcast is going to be coming back. And so there's going to be a whole lot more in this upcoming year. I'd say, I can't possibly summarize all the different aspects, but I try to make those resources as widely available as possible. So go to dyingkindness.com and then you can access all of those.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been great having you.
Thank you very much. This is great.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a rating or review. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Follow Childfree Wealth on social media or email us at podcast@childfreewealth.com. If you're interested in working together, book a free consultation call by visiting our website, childfreewealth.com. We'll see you next week.